Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another Doctor Who review. Now, I know this one's obviously a little bit late, but I've been listening to a few more audios and a few extensive stuff just to get some more content out. But without further ado, today's story is The Story and the Engine. So, without further ado, without beating around the bush, let's get right into the video. This episode enters very different to usual Doctor Who episodes. We learn about a boy from Lagos named Omo. Now, in a prequel story to this story, we find out that Omo had to leave his home from Lagos to go to a little town out in the countryside. When Omo goes to this little town in the countryside, he makes a new friend, and him and his friend begin to go adventuring. Upon trying to look through a river that, for some reason, guards who are seen as bad men won't let them go to, Omo and his friend break down the barrier in order to try and collect the water from the river to put out a fire that's caught in the town. But all of the river water has been infected by oil, causing it to make it no good for putting out the fire. Instead, it causes the fire to spread. When all of a sudden, out of nowhere, as if a miracle, a stranger arrives with a police box. The stranger pulls out a hose from the middle of nowhere and uses it to put out the fire. The stranger later reveals himself to be no more than the Doctor, and the Doctor becomes very good friends with Omo after helping his village. Omo talks about this story in the barbershop, and then all of a sudden, he begins to become very worried. He explains to his fellow colleagues that the Doctor comes whenever they need help, and right now, they need help more than anything. And so, he looks and waits for the Doctor's arrival. After the titles finish, we cut to the Doctor walking out of the blue box into Lagos, Nigeria. The Doctor goes outside for a very split second, getting some readings, and then goes back inside the blue box. He then begins to discuss with Belinda the fact that he comes to Lagos, Nigeria, not only because of a very good friend of his and being able to have really good talks in the barbershop, but also because he feels at home. He feels like it's a place where he's accepted and doesn't have to worry about being judged. Belinda lets the Doctor go off and have a wander, and as he goes through the streets, he starts to greet people that he meets. Yes, that was a bit of poetry there. Of course, he comes across an auntie, an uncle, people in the street, and he is absolutely at home with everywhere he is. But suddenly the Doctor finds something a little bit out of place. He goes across an alley and finds himself in a dark, dim place. There's a sign telling people not to go any further, and when he looks on the wall, he sees his old friend Omo and 4 or 3 other guys seem to be missing. The Doctor eventually finds the barber shop and enters. Upon doing so, he finds his old friend Omo and the missing people from the posters. He begins to ask questions about what's going on and why they are all in the barber shop when outside says they're missing. Omo points out that something has happened and there has been a shift in the barbershop business, especially with a new owner. New owner cryptically says, "I've been waiting for you, Doctor." And the Doctor begins to be introduced to the fact that every time that one of the people who goes missing tells a story and has a haircut, they begin to have their hair suddenly grow back, and the story is also played on the wall. Some kind of projection mirror that seems to tell the story in its entirety, as if it is happening here and there. Outside of the barbershop, Belinda starts to have problems with the TARDIS as it begins to go haywire. All she begins to hear every time a story is being told is absolute mayhem from the TARDIS, as if it's warning her that something is happening, some sort of disturbance. As the story progresses, we begin to hear stories of oboe players and the evolution of music. Stories of love, loss, and most importantly, we hear stories of bravery, heart, and an ordinary life. The Doctor, rather than telling a story about one of his adventures or the Time War or anything like that, decides to tell the story of Belinda Chandra and the time she saved a patient who could have almost died. It almost brings all the men in the shop to tears at how beautiful it is. The Doctor is then introduced to a beautiful woman who turns up with food. She offers the food to the 4 men who have been kidnapped, and the 4 men point out that even though they may be held hostages, the woman brings them food all the time to keep them alive. For some reason, her and the barber are the only one who can leave the barber shop, no one else, and so this begins to make the Doctor very impatient. The Doctor recognises the woman, but when she gets close enough to the Doctor, rather than giving the Doctor a response on exactly who she is, she just tucks her teeth at him and walks away. Meanwhile, outside of the TARDIS, Belinda seems to have left looking for the Doctor and comes across a very familiar looking character. Yes, this is the writer of the story, and he is posing in this episode as a marketplace salesman. Meanwhile, back inside of the shop, the Doctor becomes impatient and starts to lose it with the missing people, especially Omo, a man he considered a very great friend, and now that he knows he's been tricked into trying to help them escape the barber shop, he feels like he no longer has a sense of responsibility, and so he opens the door in hopes of escaping. But when he does, he almost gets flung out into a void of a web, unintangible to where they are. It's no longer Lagos, Nigeria. Instead, it's some kind of boundary beyond some vast, extensive reality. When he looks outside on this void and he realizes how they're traveling on the barbershop, it turns out that the barbershop is on some giant engine-looking spider, which looks very similar to Anansi, a spider god. The Doctor goes back inside of the shop, in which Belinda eventually turns up, and he gets reunited with his best friend. But after constantly asking the barber exactly who they are, the Doctor begins to get a lot of answers that he doesn't quite agree with, knowing full well that he's met the gods and he knows who they are. So he really starts to grind at the barber, asking exactly who they are. The barber then goes on to reveal that instead of being a god, in fact, they are a storyteller, and the gods took advantage of them, and so now they want to kill all the gods at all costs. The Doctor also goes on to realise that soon after, that the woman who's been tutting at him is the daughter of Anansi, the spider god. She too has agreed to this rebellion against the gods. In destroying them, she thinks that she will be able to claim the power over their reality, not realising the consequences that will happen in the meantime. Then get a brief cameo from the brilliant Jo Martin and her absolutely marvellous performance as she explains to us that Anansi had a trick that was played on Jo Martin's Doctor. It turns out that Anansi was playing a very dangerous game with the Doctor years ago, in which the Doctor would win his daughter if the Doctor won. The Doctor tried to lose, but instead won the daughter, but ended up abandoning her after the fact of being a fugitive and needing to stay on the run. After this revelation, the Doctor decides that the only way to destroy what's happened is to get to the heart of the web. He convinces Anansi's daughter into helping him take down the barber, and so she tells him the story of slaves who used to weave women's hair into mazes in order that the slave masters would never know the difference. After getting his hair plaited, the Doctor uses this as a way to find his way through a labyrinth to the heart of the web, destroying the heart. Upon failing to destroy it by ripping apart the machine, the Doctor knows there's only one last way to destroy the machine, and that is to tell a story so great that it will destroy the machine and overload it. The barber laughs at the Doctor's face, believing that the Doctor has no story great enough to destroy him, but the Doctor has one. Just one. I live, I die. I live, I die. And all of a sudden, pictures of every incarnation of the Doctor seem to pop up on the screen that's like a little old TV, showing the first Doctor, the second Doctor, the third Doctor, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth, the war, and Joe Martin and Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. So many Doctors popping up on the screen, so many endless lives. I live, I die, I live, I die. This begins to overload the machine. Belinda gets out, but the Doctor and the barber are left inside, with only minutes left before the machine fully goes up in flames. The Doctor tells the barber that this does not have to be the end of his story. He can start again. He can become a barber and do good things. Barber finally agrees with the Doctor, and the pair of them run out of the barber shop as the time machine/engine begins to explode on itself, turning the building back into a regular barber shop. The Doctor forgives Omo and forgives the others, and so he goes off on his way, leaving the barber to pick up where he left off. But what did I think of the story and the engine? Well, personally, as a Caribbean and someone who absolutely loves the idea of incorporating culture into a franchise, I love the way that this was handled in this story. I love the idea of the storytelling. I love the idea of the family kind of embrace. I love the idea of Joe Martin being included in this story. And most of all, I love the idea of how powerful stories can be to people. This story personally reminded me a bit of the Mind Robber. The Mind Robber story, in which the Doctor goes into a land where there is a guy called the Master. Not the Master, but the Master in the sense of he writes stories, and this world thrives on reality being drawn around people's creativity. And that's what I found very similar in this, except from I like the way that rather than things from people's memories coming to life, it's more that we get to watch it and kind of experience it as the stories go on. The power of history and the power of those stories and the truth behind those stories is very evident in this story. However, there is only one thing in this whole entire story I do have to slightly complain about. Barade Seifu, your performance was brilliant, but I kind of feel like this story would have worked better if Belinda had stayed in the TARDIS. Not because I want to put her on brakes or anything like that, just because this story was very much a lot like The Lodger, this idea that the TARDIS starts to play up. Maybe we could have kept the scene with Belinda in the marketplace and her getting in trouble, and maybe we could have just had her maybe not kept in the TARDIS, but just stuck out in the street for hours, getting in trouble all the time. That would have worked. But to me, the fact that she turns up halfway through the story and then kind of has to run around with the Doctor to try and break this machine, I just kind of feel like wasn't necessary. It wasn't something we needed to do. And for that reason, I'm going to have to just take 1 point off on this story and give you a 9 out of 10. But other than that, story, plot, fugitive Doctor, multiple Doctors shown on a screen, the idea that the title sequence actually gets shown in the beginning of the story on a square board that looks like a mirage worked so perfectly in the transition of this story. I love this story, and to the right of this story, you are an amazing man. I remember literally watching your barbershop chronicles years ago and still being blown away. And I love that you took the level of storytelling from the barbershop chronicles and you put it into Doctor Who. And for that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you everyone for watching. We will see you in the next Doctor Who review. Until then, stay amazing, stay beautiful, and goodbye, my absolutely gorgeous Whovians.